Robert Plank Show, episode 372, PeopleShock. Increase customer satisfaction by blending automation and the human factor with Tema Frank. Hey everyone, and thanks for listening. We're talking right now with Tema Frank, and Tema she used social media techniques before social media existed and developed a panel of 75,000 website and customer service testers worldwide. And she's the author of the best-selling book PeopleShock: The Path to Profits When Customers Rule, and we're going to talk about lots of interesting stuff today. So Tema, how are things?
Things are just fine, and
Awesome.
it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, it is a pleasure to have you here. I'm glad to hear that everything is just fine. And so, what's sort of on your mind lately? I mean, what kind of problems do you see us, marketers and entrepreneurs facing?
Well, I guess what I really see is a combination of two things. One is customer expectations just continue to go up and up and up. I mean, Amazon has set this incredibly high standard, and even if you're not in one of the areas that they sell directly to, they're still influencing how people perceive your service levels. So that's a big thing. And then the other thing that's really affecting customer experience and businesses is increasing automation and artificial intelligence. And, that can be a really great thing if it's handled well, or it can be a real disaster if not.
Well, super cool. I can't wait to dive into both those things. And so customer expectations are higher than ever, and then we all need to increase our automation. And yeah, this customer expectation thing, like it's always on my mind because whenever I like order a new appliance or something, I always kind of have to chase them. Like a couple years ago, we had to get a new bed, and I think I waited like a week and a half, and excuse me, I finally called them, and they were like, "Oh yeah, we were just about to call you today. The bed finally came in." And I was thinking at the time, like, I wish they had just like sent me a quick email or left me a quick voicemail, just like saying like even like we got your order, or we expect 5 days, even something like that. And I just keep seeing this like over and over again. Like I have a coaching client who bought a $10,000 piece of software a month ago, and he still hasn't gotten anything, and he keeps having to like hound the seller
Oh,
over and over just for this thing where like he's got the money, he cashed the check, but not delivering. And so I'm noticing this over and over in that there's all this like the money is exchanged hands, there's not even a notification, and even if there's a delay, or even if things are slow, it's like as a buyer, like I would at least like just a quick 2 sentence email, 10-second phone call, just a notification, just to kind of touch base real quick. So, I mean, that's kind of what I think about those customer expectations. But I'm curious to hear kind of about like what you think. I mean, what's the problem? What's the solution here?
well, your examples are great ones, and there's really no excuse for that kind of thing happening. And, especially these days, and certainly larger companies now, you can go in and track your shipments and things like that. But there are companies like Casper, which is a mattress manufacturer, that totally revolutionized that industry of beds because of frustrations like yours. And so they actually deliver straight to your door. They do it within, I don't know, 24 or 48 hours. And they've just grown like crazy. But, a lot of it is people just, as you say, you want to know what's going on. I mean, we see that in airports too, right? When flights are delayed, people get upset, but they're a lot less upset if the airline staff are telling them what's going on. Here's the problem, here's how long we think it'll take to fix it, here's what to do if you're going to miss your connections. Just keep people posted, and that'll certainly help. But the overall thing, I think, and I talk about it in the book in People Shock, are what I call the three P's of profit, which are promise, people, and process. So we've just talked here a little bit about process, the third P. You've got to make sure that your processes really make sense both for your organization, but most importantly for your customers. And that's one area where automation can really be helpful, just to make it a lot simpler so things don't fall through the cracks.
And so, is there an easy way for someone to tell if those things are falling through the cracks? Like, should they be like going through the process as a customer, or surveying their customers, or what should we all be doing just to even figure out like if there's a problem at all?
Well, I mean, you can get clues that there are problems. If, for instance, you're not having a good rate of repeat customers or customer referrals, that certainly gives you a hint that there are problems. Also, just by looking at the number of complaints you get and what they're about, that can also help. But honestly, especially for a small business audience, I think the most important thing you can do is get out there and actually talk to your customers, talk to people who you lost as customers. And I'm talking like face to face, one on one, real conversations. Everybody's so tired of surveys now that the last thing they need is to have, another survey thrown, and you're not going to get much information from that. But you certainly can get a lot of valuable information by making it clear to them that you really want to know what's going on and how they perceive the service or products that you're offering.
Awesome, and that makes a lot of sense to me. And in the past week or two, I've been making an effort to call like one customer, and not every day, but maybe a handful of times a week, just first thing in the morning before I even have time to talk myself out of it. I just like choose one of my customers who recently bought, look up their phone number, have a quick chat, or leave a voicemail just to kind of get that kind of heartbeat on
Yep.
there. And what really blew me away with that was I was listening to some like realtor podcast a couple months ago, and they were saying that with those realtors, they'll have their customer list, and they might have just like 300 500 people, and they'll call the whole entire customer list every like 3 months, every 6 months. And I'm thinking like, whoa, I probably haven't even called like 10% of, I probably haven't even called 5% of my customers, let alone the whole dang thing over and over again. And so like that's just a really kind of important lesson there that I think that we've all kind of heard, that like, oh yeah, you should be talking to your customers, but like, well, have you really talked to them?
Well, and I like your idea. What you're doing is doing it first thing in the morning, as you say, before you can talk yourself out of it. Because I think a lot of owners, even if they don't want to admit it to themselves, are a little nervous to phone customers, and especially customers that they've lost, because they don't really want to hear the bad stuff. But you have to if you want to get better.
And so to sort of like reassure us, do you have any interesting stories like that of maybe have you or a client or someone called some of those customers that they lost? Because like that's another thing where like I have to admit that hasn't crossed my mind yet. And then now that I think about it, I'm almost sort of afraid to look up someone who maybe hasn't bought in 2, 3, 4 years. It's just like I don't even know how that would go. I don't even know how, if they would remember me or if they would be angry. So do you have any interesting stories to share sort of on that topic of calling those old or those unhappy customers?
Sure. And there are a couple of examples that I've done on my podcast, the Frank Reactions podcast, but one that comes to mind, for instance, it was a company called Bentley Leathers, and they sell wallets and luggage and things like that. And their online customer service had been terrible for quite some time. And the fellow I was interviewing had been brought in right before Christmas, like 3 weeks before, right in the peak of that rush to try and turn things around. And the first thing he did was he got on the phone and started calling previous customers, and particularly those who had complained before. And he said, I'm new in this role. I know that the company didn't treat you right in the past, and I'd really like to find out what we can do better. Now, if you're not new, and it was huge, it totally turned things around. It made a huge difference. If you're not new in the role, you can't use that excuse, but you can certainly just call them and say, look, I realize that it's been quite a while since we've spoken, and I know that you haven't come back or that you weren't happy with us. And as a business owner, I really want to understand what we could do better. And people are really open to that, because the thing is, if they were once your customer, it means that you're offering, or we're offering, something that they valued. So they want you to be better.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. Like they came to you the first time, so you did something right the first time. It's just a matter of maybe like recapturing some of that magic or something.
Absolutely. And then, the other thing that is really helpful is, while, particularly if it's not a quick transaction, like if you're a consultant or something and it's an ongoing relationship, is just regularly touch base with them and say, how are things going? Are there things that are starting to make you uncomfortable, or are you upset? Are there things that we could be doing that would make this relationship go better? Um, or are there ways that I could be more helpful to you? You don't even need to position it as though you were doing something wrong, because you might not be. Things could be going great, in which case they'll tell you. But you want to keep those lines of communication open and not wait until a little irritation becomes a huge problem.
That makes sense. And so, in your all of your like experiences and travels and things, when people reach out to these customers, is there a usual answer, or are the answers just all over the place?
I think it really varies. It depends on the industry. It depends on the circumstances in which they left you, or if they're current customers, the current circumstances. It depends on, a whole bunch of things. But the one thing that I think is pretty consistent is the worst that'll happen is maybe if it was very recent and they were very angry, they might hang up on you. But even that's pretty rare. Generally speaking, the worst that'll happen is they'll say, man, no, I don't really want to talk about it. So what have you lost? Nothing, because they weren't happy with you anyway. And the best that'll happen, and what happens more often than not, is you'll get some really great insight into how you can improve. And often they'll actually give you another try.
Interesting. So you get a double whammy there. You get
Yeah,
the feedback plus just the fact that you cared enough to reach out kind of gets
yeah,
you in their attention again. Awesome.
absolutely.
And so you say that so this book, PeopleShock, you say that it comes down to promise, people, and process. So can you kind of unpack like the other two P's in there?
Absolutely. So the first P, the promise, is why are you doing what you're doing? What is your business all about? How is it different from your competitors? What motivates you if you've got staff? What would motivate them? What would make people want to be associated with your company, whether it's as customers or as employees? So, and the great thing about really nailing down the vision of your organization in pretty concrete terms is that you can then set some guidelines, I guess, that will help you filter decisions as you go forward. So if you've got a decision to make, let's say as an owner, about whether or not to acquire another business or take on a new product line, but you're not, something in your gut isn't quite right, having a clearly articulated promise, you can then say, okay, well, if this is my promise, this is what we're trying to accomplish, will this new thing help with that or not? So it gives you a filter, and it gives your employees a filter if they have to make decisions and you're not around to consult with. So that's the first P. The second P is people, and I divide that into internal people, which is obviously employees, and external people, which includes not just customers and prospects, but a whole range of other people who can influence the customer experience you're providing. So for instance, your suppliers. If you don't have a good relationship with your suppliers and they run short of supply, you're not going to be the one who gets that limited supply. And if you don't get it, that means you can't serve your customers as well because you can't produce what you're supposed to produce for them. So suppliers, distributors, colleagues from other companies, like there's this whole range of people. And now, of course, the general public can all influence your reputation and how well you can serve your customers pretty quickly. So, and then on the employee side, the reality is, simply put, you're not going to have happy customers if you don't have happy employees. That's as blunt as I can put it. It is really, really important that your employees feel valued, that they have opportunities to develop and to learn, and feel like they're part of something important. And that will motivate them to work well and to do the best for you and for your customers. And then, of course, the third P is the process, which I touched on earlier. But what I recommend for that is you want to look at it starting from a customer's perspective. So if you were somebody who was thinking that you might need a product or service like what Robert offers, how would you even go about looking for it? So start from there. what would their experience be when they first come in contact with your website, let's say? What's the experience like if they try to call you or email you or tweet you? How quickly does your company respond? Um, how well do you follow up on orders, on customer complaints? What do you have processes in place for all these things to make sure that they're getting resolved? So I remember one company that I spoke to, and they'd grown really quickly. And so as they were growing, they implemented a process where customer tickets were logged, and if the customer case wasn't resolved within, I think, 2 days, or it went to a manager level, and if it was another 2 or 3 days, it went right to the president. And so there was no chance that things would fall through the cracks. And that's where automation can really help.
That is super awesome and also kind of scary at the same time, right? If you don't get back to them right away.
Yeah, and unfortunately, customer standards are getting pretty high. But often even just getting back to them saying, we got your comment, we're working on it. It may be a couple of days before I can get back to you. Give them a realistic time estimate. If you do that, that's almost as good as being able to solve it right away.
Right, I agree, and so this is making a lot of sense, and I can sort of see how like the promise sort of makes the people part of it work, and then if you have the people and they follow the process correctly, then like that all kind of works together. And so I'm sort of curious about, so on the promise section there, you said like, be clear about like why your company's doing what you're doing and what motivates you, and what differentiates you from the competition and things like that. And I mean, how much work is involved there? Are we talking, is that like a sentence? Is that like a page? Like to get that sort of promise figured out, I mean, how much of a promise is it?
You want to keep it as short as possible, but you want it to be meaningful. So if you can do it in 10 words or less, that's awesome. But you may need to, for instance, flesh it out with some specific core values, like a list of core values. And there are some examples in the book, but that you want it to be something short enough that everybody in your organization can grasp it quickly and remember it easily. Um, and a lot of organizations, they just, there was a trend a few years ago where they just have spend weeks and months developing these huge mission statements, and it's pointless. If people can't remember it, it's not going to help.
So I know you said that you have a bunch of examples in the book, but off the top of your head, just to help us understand, do you have any that you know offhand?
Well, I was just trying to remember exactly how they phrased it. But if you think, for instance, Microsoft in its earliest days, and for some of your listeners, they may not remember these days because it may have been before they were born.
I,
But
I might not have even been born yet at the
yeah,
time.
I can see you're fairly young, so you might not have. There was a time when we didn't all have computers in our pockets or on our desks even. There was a time when a lot of people didn't have personal computers. And Microsoft initially made its mission to put a computer in every home. Very clear, very simple, very memorable. In more recent years, obviously, they had to change that mission because basically they'd accomplished it, right? And that's another point, is sometimes you do need to revisit these things and make sure that what you're doing is still consistent, or that that is in fact still your goal. So that's one example. I think Google's was something like to organize all the world's knowledge and make it easy to find, something like that. So it clearly stated what they were trying to do and why.
Super cool, yeah, and so that makes sense now, and I also appreciate that 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 promise might change. So that, like you said, like the computers change, internet changes, makes a lot of sense. And so I don't want to keep you for too long here, but sort of as we're starting to wind down, I want to make sure that we hear from you about these trends about the increase in automation and artificial intelligence, because I keep hearing about stuff that's coming, or is there like IBM Watson's doing something, or like Facebook chatbots, and I always hear like little tidbits, but I don't actually know like what's actually happening with this artificial intelligence, with this automation stuff. So can you kind of fill us in, tell us what's happening?
Well, what's happening is that more and more is being dealt with through artificial intelligence. So, for instance, probably we all know by now that our Facebook feed, we obviously don't get everything that gets posted by our friends. There's an algorithm that decides what we see and when we see it. And so that's done through using artificial intelligence techniques. But increasingly, larger companies now are starting to use artificial intelligence for live chat on their websites. And it's still far from perfect, but a lot of the basic inquiries that people have can be answered that way. And of course, with artificial intelligence, the way it works is the more it's used, the better it gets because it basically learns from what it's done previously. So there's huge potential there. I think for most really small businesses, artificial intelligence directly won't be what they're likely to be using, although, there's starting to be services, cloud-based services that you can use that will help you tap into some of the potential of artificial intelligence. But at this point, I think for most small businesses, it's something to be aware of, but you probably don't need to invest in it yet.
Okay, fair enough, and that's reassuring that there are those cloud-based services that are in place, and I'm sure that there will be more and more. So whenever somebody cracks the code as far as like a completely believable chatbot where you can ask any pre-sale question and look up any kind of order, once one competitor uses it, then there'll be some service that we can all hook into. So that's all good to know, and good to know that kind of stuff is coming.
Yeah, well, and I think one thing that's a real advantage that small businesses have right now over large businesses, and that they will have even once the large ones are using artificial intelligence, is that the human connection can still be much more powerful. So you don't want to automate everything. You do want to have options available because there's some people who don't want to talk to a human, but often the human touch will be have a greater impact on customers. So when you're small, it's easier to actually reach out and talk to all of your customers.
Awesome, and that definitely makes sense because I hear more and more about people saying like, well, when I order a pizza, I just want to be able to send a text message or a
Mm-hmm.
Facebook message, and so that's really good way of thinking there. That maybe that for a small businesses, artificial intelligence isn't there to replace the customer service, but to make it way more awesome and make it where we can, accomplish the same without hiring a bunch of people or do it faster or things like that.
Well, and even before artificial intelligence, and a mistake that I've seen some often older entrepreneurs make is they take great pride in saying, well, nobody goes to voicemail in our company. Every call is answered by a person. Well, honestly, if I have to leave a detailed message, I'd rather be able to do that in voicemail than to have to talk to an assistant who can't answer my question. So you really need to think through the use case each time. Is this a case where automation would make more sense? Or is it a case where talking to a real live human will make more sense? And you
Awesome.
need to use both.
Yeah, yeah, and that sort of reminds me of I saw one marketer one time bragging about how quickly they respond to tickets, and he was like, "Look, last month we had like 2,000 support tickets, and we responded to them all in an hour." And I'm thinking, "Oh, you have that many support tickets? You must have like some buggy software if I have to always be
Yeah,
talking to support."
yeah, exactly.
So yeah, so I guess the customer service and like the having all this technology, that's all useful as long as I guess we don't lose sight of what it's supposed to do, right? And so it's like, well, if
Exactly.
it's supposed to make the customer's experience better, that's great. But if it makes it where you respond to tickets in 60 minutes instead of 2 hours, like why would I even care about that, right?
Right. And if you've got 1,000 complaints, you should be analyzing that database. What are the trends? What are the common elements? And fixing your damn product or processes
Yeah,
so
like
that so that you cut down on the number of complaints.
solving the correct problem. Yeah, because
Yeah.
I remember seeing some story one time about some software company had some sort of ticket system, and then the boss started grading programmers based on like how many tickets they'd solved or something silly like that. So then the programmers kept on saying to the customers, "Oh, well, make sure to click the button to say it's solved, and then I'll go and I'll fix it off to the side." And it's like, so
Mhm.
because you set the wrong goal, now people are working around your system. So that definitely I've definitely heard like horror stories, and that's making a lot of sense there. And so I would definitely want to make sure that we hear all about this PeopleShock book and this Frank Reactions podcast, along with anything else that you have going on. So can you kind of tell us about all these cool things that we can get?
Great. So PeopleShock, The Path to Profits When Customers Rule, is available on Amazon. So you can look it up and find it there, and you can read a good chunk of it online as well. And you can learn more about Frank Reactions and about the book as well at frankreactions.com. You can connect with me if you've got questions by email, Tema, T-E-M as in marketing, A, at frankreactions.com, or on Twitter, just Tema Frank, or through LinkedIn, whatever. So I would love to hear from people.
Super great. So frankreactions.com, Tema at frankreactions.com. That's Tema, and then Tema Frank on Twitter, and then search for Tema Frank on LinkedIn. So sort of as we're kind of like saying goodbye to people and stuff like that, do you have any just sort of like a sentence or two, or just something that you want to stick in the heads of everyone listening today?
I think the most important thing is talk to people, both employees and customers. Really ask them questions and really listen to what they're telling you.
Super cool, great advice. So I talk to people, and I can definitely relate to that. Like, I for sure went for so many years when I was just hiding behind the computer, and I didn't bother to run webinars and look at the chat box. I didn't bother to send emails asking questions to my list. I didn't bother calling people up on the phone or even sending like little personal emails. And as soon as I did, I'm glad that I did. And it's like it's an ongoing process because I mean sometimes I'll take like weeks and weeks without reaching out to people. So really good advice. Thanks for that. So talk to people and get out from behind the computer because so many of those other competitors are hiding behind the computer. And look at how bad their customer support is. So, really great advice, and I like how a lot of the advice you gave to us today was centered around like ways that us little people can outmarket or run circles around all these big companies who don't
Yeah,
don't really know what the problem is, and at least we do, right?
exactly.
Well, cool. So everyone should go to frankreactions.com right now, and I want to thank you, Temo, for stopping by and sharing all this fun stuff with us.
It's been great to be here.
Have you heard of Google? How about Google Calendar, Google Drive, or Gmail? Do you struggle mastering these powerful but sometimes scary technologies? Our new book, The Checklist Mindset, makes it simple. It's the next best thing to hiring a full time virtual assistant. Claim your copy of our book on Kindle at www.checklistmindset.com.